If you have a true scary story you would like to share with the channel, just go to astheravendreams.com and click the big button that says Submit Your Story. And of course, thank you. I'm a teacher, and I have been for about 23 years now. I've taught everywhere from kindergarten to freshman year high school. From teaching such a range of kids, they've all had their pros and their cons. The older they were, the more rebellious they were, or the more they talked back. But it was also easier to explain things to them. Younger kids tend to listen better, but then you have to keep in mind that they are younger and less experienced, so sometimes you really have to break things down and even explain simple right and wrong scenarios. Overall, I don't think I had a favorite either way. However, the younger kids really did say the weirdest things. Some of them were funny or nonsensical, others were a bit more alarming. I wanted to share some of the experiences that I still very clearly remember. This occurred when I taught a kindergarten class. Our normal class routine included reading time, where, for an hour, I would read a book while they all sat around and listened. They typically got to choose or vote on the book that they wanted, but I had just bought a story pack of 6 books, so I was reading one from there. I don't remember the exact story. It was one of the short stories in the first book, but there was a talking rabbit that accompanied a young child through a forest after getting lost. No, it wasn't Alice in Wonderland. But now that I think of it, maybe it was a ripoff. Anyway, I tried to engage the kids in the story by asking questions, or letting them ask questions. So there were frequent pauses in reading time, which was fine. There was a boy named Aiden who was always a very curious child. He asked so many questions, and I always thought that he was just a smart kid, and his curiosity, if he kept it up as he grew up, would take him far. But the questions and comments during this reading time were a bit more morbid. He started by asking, "Does Bunny die in this story?" I thought it was a normal question. Some kids may have experienced death in their own pets, maybe even relatives like grandparents. So I told him no, as I always go over stories before I read them to make sure there are no inappropriate topics in them. Then he asked if the bunny does die, would it go to heaven? I try to steer clear of religion in class for obvious reasons that I shouldn't have to explain. So I just told him that it was a great question, but that I didn't know, and then suggested that he ask his parents. He seemed quite satisfied with the response. After the story was over, he asked, "Do you have any stories where someone dies?" I was taken aback by the question, but just told him no with a raised eyebrow. Reading time finished, and we went back to our normal class curriculum afterwards. Later on, during recess, I saw Aiden sitting in the rocks, not playing, and he seemed like he was holding his knee. He wasn't crying or looking scared, but I was worried that he had injured himself, so I approached him. I asked him if he was okay or if he was hurt, but I noticed that his knee looked fine, but he looked deep in thought. So I asked him what he was thinking about. "I can't wait to see what my bones look like." He said this in such a calm and dreamy sounding voice, like it was a totally normal thing to say out loud. I tried asking him what he meant or why he wanted to see them, and he just said something about how he likes to see plain bones, which is why he likes to eat chicken legs. Then he explained that looking at his knee was as close as he could get to seeing his bones. Surely it had to be innocent. Just a curious young kid, right? Either way, I tried my best to explain that he wouldn't see his own bones, because then that would be a bad thing. And I tried to offer some child-friendly skeleton book. We had a few that went over the structure of the skeleton of humans, as well as some animals. Aiden still said some pretty creepy things like that throughout the year, but thankfully he never took any actions to actually see his bones. Well, at least not in my class. There was another kid in my class named Abigail. It was always Abigail, never Abby. She seemed okay, but just seemed to have issues with making friends. She was always really standoffish, watching others play. I approached her one time and asked her if she was okay and if she wanted to play with them. She said yes, but that her friend would get mad for leaving him. I smiled and told her that her friend was welcome to play too if they were out there. I began looking around, thinking that this friend must have been nearby, and possibly as equally shy as her. But I didn't see anyone else lingering like she would. So I asked her where her friend was. She seemed to look past me and said, "He's right there. It's the Shadow Man." I stood up and quickly turned around, but there was nobody there. Before I got to ask again, she looked down at the ground and said, "He won't let me play with the other kids. He just tells me to do bad things." This thing was obviously causing her problems, whether it was her imaginary friend and she had the bad thoughts, blaming it on them, or she actually had someone or something following her around. When it comes to the paranormal, I absolutely believe in it, and I believe that kids seem to be more in tune and sensitive to these kinds of things than we are. So I told her that, regardless of who it was, it sounded like a bully, and that if she didn't want to do what it said, or if it made her feel uncomfortable, then she should just say no. A few days after that event, we had a storm, so recess was inside. We were all playing in the play area in the classroom, and I was at my desk, bouncing between paperwork and watching them. I happened to look up at the right time, and I saw Abigail holding a pair of scissors to the back of another girl's head. Out of reflexes, I yelled Abigail's name, which startled all of the kids, and the one that was about to get her hair cut turned around to look at me and saw Abigail. I ran over to them and told them to continue playing, and then asked Abigail what she was doing. Her eyes just looked glossed over, and in her soft little voice she said, "The Shadow Man told me to do it, or he would take me away to his world, where there's no sun, only darkness." What the hell? So I had a heart-to-heart with her, and again explained right from wrong and how she shouldn't listen to this Shadow Man. I ended up writing up a pretty extensive email to her parents about the situation too. They never responded back to me, but I did notice that, slowly, Abigail seemed to turn into a pretty light-hearted and playful girl. Maybe their parents knew more about this Shadow Man than what I knew was there. I have one last story that I'll share for now. There was this boy named Carson, who was in the same class as Abigail, actually. That class was a handful for more reasons than just these two kids. So, Carson seemed to be able to tell the future. I know that it sounds ridiculous, but I still have troubles with it myself. Carson would make these random comments, and I just took it as him being dramatic. For example, he made something during art time and told me that it was for his grandma. I thought it was a sweet gesture, but then he said, "She's gonna fall and break her hip soon." I obviously didn't hear him correctly, and thought he had just said that she had fallen. But no, he corrected me. I said something and he clarified. "No, it hasn't happened yet, but when it does, I will be ready." Okay, a little weird, but I let it go. No point in arguing with a child. About 2 days or so later, his mom came and picked him up early because her mom had fallen and had to be taken to the hospital. She was worried that she wouldn't be home to get him from the bus. Okay, so Grandma did end up breaking her hip. Bizarre, but whatever. But then there were several more times where Carson would seemingly predict the future, and they came true. He mentioned their dog passing away after getting sick. He had seizures, and he died from it. He said his mom was going to get into a car crash. Someone had ran a red light and T-boned her. I became nervous talking to him, fearing that he would have a new prediction and that I would be on edge. We had a birthday party for another kid, and while everyone was enjoying their cupcake, I walked around to make sure all the kids were doing okay, needed a napkin, threw away their trash, and so forth. I stopped by Carson's desk, asking for his trash, and saw him trying to wrap up his cupcake. I asked him what he was doing, if maybe he wasn't hungry, and he shook his head. No, I want to share it with my dad because he's going to die at work tomorrow. That one was pretty intense, as he said it in a very matter-of-fact tone. I stayed calm and collected, and while they enjoyed the little party, I emailed his mom and told her what he had said. We talked briefly as she picked him up that day about it, and she said that it was definitely strange, and that she had witnessed him saying similar things at home. But she always seemed to brush it off like it was just his imagination. I tried to match that with her, not wanting her to think the teacher was crazy, but come on. Not once did he predict correctly, but multiple times. I just prayed that one wouldn't come true, and thankfully, throughout the school year, Dad never died. Hopefully that one was just his imagination. When I remember Carson, I often wonder if he still makes predictions like that. So, there are a few kids that scared me as a grown adult. I love teaching, and still do today, but sometimes, kids can unintentionally be pretty unsettling. I just have to remember that they're kids, though. It's not like they're intentionally trying to scare me, right? I have plenty more stories about these things that kids have said or done. I'm fairly new to your channel, so if your audience likes them, I will happily write up some more for you. I've always been really good with kids. I'm the oldest of 8 siblings, and now have 5 nephews and 4 nieces. It seemed to always just come naturally to me, to be a shoo-in parent when I babysat or just watched my siblings, or being the cool aunt that they all trusted. At the time of this event, I was around 26, single and living in my house by myself. Well, other than my 2 cats. My neighborhood had a lot of families in it that had 1 to 3 kids in each. They were all pretty nice, and, honestly, fairly well-behaved kids. When they would ride their bikes while I was out in my yard, they would wave and say hi. Sometimes they would be doing donations or fundraisers for their schools, and I would participate. It was, honestly, a pretty peaceful neighborhood, and I loved it. But then there was a family that moved in that kind of disrupted that peaceful life for me. I had found out that it was a mom and a dad and their son that I'll call Tommy. They had all moved into the dad's parents' house, apparently his childhood home. I don't know if it was to help to take care of his mom, or if maybe something happened to them and they lost their house. I didn't talk much to the parents. They also lived a few houses down, so I didn't really have an opportunity to do so. But Tommy? I definitely had multiple run-ins with him. And I wish that I hadn't. Tommy was probably around 11 or 12, I believe. He started out as just another normal kid on the block. I saw him playing with some of the other kids, riding bikes and such, so I paid no extra attention to it. But then there was one day that I was out front, mowing my little yard. I started getting that feeling that I was being watched. I stopped the mower and looked around and just saw Tommy standing at the edge of my driveway. He was just staring at me, watching intently. I smiled and waved at him, but he didn't wave back. It was weird, and I tried to shrug it off and continue mowing, but I could sense that he was still watching me. From that day on, I started to sense that there was something about him that just did not sit right with me. A few days after the mowing event, I was sitting on my porch swing, reading and enjoying my coffee. It was one of my favorite things to do when I had nothing to do. My front yard wasn't fenced in, so it was normal for people or kids to walk over, or sometimes even pets that got out, or strays. I pretty much welcomed all of it. It was a safe neighborhood, and who wouldn't want to pet a new cat or dog? The swing was on the left side of my porch, and my driveway was on the right, so I didn't see someone walking up at first until I heard a kid shout, "What are you reading?" I looked up, startled, and saw Tommy standing near my porch steps, holding a small knife, with his head tilted and eyes locked on me. I told him the name of the book and he asked what it was about, so I explained it briefly. Yes, I'm a sucker for romance books and spooky YouTube stories. So I was joking around and I said something like, "It's a romance about two people falling in love," thinking he would be like, "Gross," or something. I kind of got that response, but a lot more intense. "That sounds boring. You should read a book about a serial killer." I do like thriller books too, but why be so specific? About a serial killer? I asked him why, and he just said they're cool and more interesting. Wanting to change the subject, I asked him why he had a pocket knife on him. He shrugged and then held up the knife like he was studying it. "I don't know, in case I need to stab something." I know I had to have a concerned look on my face. My brother and I found a knife in the dirt one day when we were younger, and after looking it over and me almost cutting my finger trying to close it, I brought it to my mom. I was always scared of me or my siblings getting hurt, so I tried my best to prevent it where I could. So when he just nonchalantly said, in case he needed to stab something, it kind of bothered me. I tried asking what he would need to stab and where he got it from, but he said he didn't know and that he just found it. Maybe he could sense that I was ready to take it from him or something, because he quickly turned back around and walked off without saying anything else. I knew it was dangerous for him to have that knife, but I felt like I had no place to tell his parents it wasn't okay, so I never did. I wasn't a friend, family, or even a teacher, so I just kept it to myself. From then on, I seemed to see Tommy everywhere. Yeah, it was normal to see kids in the neighborhood, but it was more than that. I would leave and see Tommy standing at the edge of my driveway. I would be coming home and he would be sitting on the rock hill across the street, like he was waiting for me to get home. I would even go out for a jog and I would see him, standing nearby, just watching. He was a small child, so why did it feel like I was prey being stalked? There were a few more major incidents with Tommy that really freaked me out. The next one happened one Sunday evening. Our trash collectors came every Monday morning, so I had to take my bins out. Later that night, I forgot to empty my recycling bin and groaned that I had to walk to the end of the driveway with it. But I bucked up and took it out. As I started walking it out, I noticed my trash bin was knocked over, and I heard some soft shuffling. I had never had issues with my bins before, but I knew that we had a few raccoons in the area, so I was nervous at first to get any closer. But then I saw Tommy pop up from it. His eyes were wide, like he'd been startled too, but everything else about him seemed calm. I asked him a little more sternly, because why wouldn't I be angry or curious? "Tommy, what are you doing?" He again shrugged and said, "I like your stuff. It's cool." He then held up an empty soda can and said, "Can I keep this?" I was so creeped out and confused that I just nodded. He smiled and shoved the can in his pocket and walked away. I went back in my house thinking, what the hell was that? What did he mean I had cool stuff? Why was he going through my trash? Why was he out so late, and how many times had he done this before? He didn't make a mess, at least, but still, going through someone else's trash was weird and potentially dangerous. He didn't know what I had in there. Still, not comfortable with telling his parents, I decided to make a post on the Nextdoor app. I just mentioned something about how someone had been going through my trash, and that it was definitely a person. A kid, at that. But I couldn't tell who it was. Unfortunately, no one said that they were having a similar experience, but that they would keep an eye out. So, Tommy seemed to be singling me out specifically. This made it even weirder for me. What was he hoping to find in my trash? It definitely creeped me out, but he was still a kid. Maybe he was just an oddball. I grew up with some myself, and I'm sure some thought I was one too. I didn't go through other people's trash, but regardless, I thought I could just deal with it, seeing him occasionally, until he got older and grew out of it. But of course, it wouldn't be that easy. One of the creepiest experiences happened one night when I was sitting at home, enjoying my night off. After having dinner, I took a shower and went straight to my room wrapped in a towel to grab my pajamas. As I started getting dressed, I heard a tapping sound on my window. I had dark purple curtains drawn so I couldn't see out, but I knew we were expecting a pretty crazy storm that night. I assumed it was the rain or maybe even hail hitting it, so I ignored it. After I was dressed, I went to put on my slippers as I was planning on lounging in the living room for a while, when I heard the tapping sound again. This time it was a little louder, and also too patterned for me to ignore. I went to the window and slowly pulled the curtains apart, when I nearly had a heart attack. There was Tommy, his face pressed against my window, smiling and waving wildly. I screamed, "What the hell, Tommy? Go home!" I don't know if he could hear me, but I was scared and angry. Why was he trying to look into my window? Not to mention, it made sense then that he was knocking on the window, so he was probably trying to get my attention, and not just trying to peep. But why? After I said this, I closed my windows and ran to my backyard. The window was on the side of the house, but it was easier to get to from the back. I ran outside, still in my slippers. Thankfully, it wasn't raining yet, and I saw him slowly walking back to the front. He wasn't running. He didn't look scared or like he was caught either, just kind of browsing. I know that I was scared and upset, so I should have calmed down. He was still a kid after all, but I plainly asked him, "Tommy, why are you in my yard? You need to go home before I tell your parents." He just looked at me and shrugged. "I don't know, I just like watching you." I told him to go home, and I watched him walk out of my yard and up the street. I will remind you that it was dark out. It was about to storm. He didn't ride his bike, based on how he kept walking up the street, and he lived a few houses down. Why did his parents not seem to care about his whereabouts? I was frustrated, but also part of me was concerned for him. So I even walked to the end of my driveway to make sure that he got home safely. I could just barely see him enter, but I did see him walk up to the porch patio. It was kind of hard to sleep that night, wondering if he would come back. So I slept in the living room. The next day I contemplated what to do. I didn't want to call the police. He was still young, and I'm not the type to think that being arrested and traumatizing a child, nonetheless, was a solution. So I told myself it was time to tell his parents. Something needed to be done, and it should probably start at home. So I got out to my car earlier than I usually do for work, and I drove over to Tommy's house. His mom answered, and I immediately, and politely, explained what had happened. I explained the knife that he had. I mentioned him watching me and seemingly following me. I also mentioned how he was trying to look through my window. I would not have expected her response. She didn't look surprised whatsoever. She didn't look shocked or embarrassed. She didn't even apologize for his actions. I know that I wasn't a parent, but I think if a stranger or neighbor approached me and told me the same thing about my kid, I would be concerned about his actions. Instead, she shrugged and said, "Yeah, well, you know, boys will be boys. He's at that age where he's really curious about girls." Then, she had the audacity to ask me if I was undressing with the windows open. It was my own house. Why do I need to watch what I'm doing in my own home? I didn't want to start a fight with this woman, so I just said that he needed to stay out of my yard, or else I would have to call the police. She literally rolled her eyes at me and said that she would talk to him about it, and then practically shut the door in my face. I left their house feeling like nothing was accomplished. I didn't know what else to do. I just hoped that even if she didn't take what I said seriously, that she would at least tell him to stay out of my yard. And it seems like that was the only thing that happened. I still saw him watching me when I went out for a jog. I saw him across the street. He was everywhere, but he did stay out of my yard. It was still unnerving. Why was this kid watching me? Why was I the target? I wish I could say there was a better ending to this story, but there wasn't. I just lived with this. I didn't know if he was finally talked to or if he grew bored, but he did slowly stop. Or at least was less noticeable. I still live in the same house, and his family moved out about a year ago. I don't know what happened or why, but I'm honestly thankful they moved. I hope that if this was a phase, that Tommy did just grow out of it, and that his parents were more involved and talked to him about how that was unacceptable. Otherwise, the neighborhood is still great, and I think I'll stick around. I will let you know if I get any more weird neighbors, though. I've been babysitting since I was allowed to be home alone. I babysat my own siblings, and when my mind understood that I could continue to do what I normally do, with some authority and get paid for it, I offered to babysit any chance that I could. Maybe it was being around so many kids, but it also made me realize how much I loved kids, and how well I can work with them. It's actually the reason I went to college for children's psychology. While I went to school, I continued to babysit, house sit, or pet sit wherever I could. It was basically my job. I was lucky enough that my parents helped me buy an apartment so I could focus on schooling and continue doing what I loved. However, there were some sitting jobs that I would end up quitting, or had quite the lasting memories of, good and bad. Cecily was one of those unforgettable jobs. Cecily was an 8-year-old girl. Her parents found me on a babysitting website. I had listed myself and had tons of reviews, so it was normal for people to find me that way. Cecily's mom was a full-time caretaker. She basically took care of those in hospice, but from their home, so she couldn't take Cecily with her, understandably. And Dad was a police officer. Definitely not the place for her either. They needed someone to watch her on days that daycare didn't align with Mom's schedule. Dad was practically always on call, so he couldn't watch her alone. So they had 2 days they specifically needed me to watch her, and asked if I could watch her in an emergency, promising they would pay double. I agreed. It was simple enough, and I only had one other set schedule at the time. They understood that I may not always be available for emergencies, but if I was, the double pay would be nice. My first day was pretty simple. A quick tour of the home, introducing me to Cecily, and some awkwardness when you first get to know a new child. Unlike some kids, Cecily was very outgoing, and it didn't take long for her to open up to me. She immediately wanted to show me all of her toys and play with me. She wanted to make all these plans with me, and it was really sweet. She was an only child, so I think she just really enjoyed the company and attention. This was how the first few weeks went with me watching her. She showed me all the new things that she got or made in daycare, and we'd play for a little while. I would go into the living room and watch some TV while I did schoolwork, if I had any, and then I would make dinner, we would eat, and she would either sit in the living room with me, sometimes we'd watch a movie, or she would go play in her bedroom. Her parents said that she had what they called a settle down time, which was right after dinner. She could play or do what she wanted, as long as it was calm and quiet. It was their way of getting her ready for bed, I believe. One evening, I was in the living room and Cecily had gone to her room to play some more. Her room was the first one off the living room, so with her door open, you could hear her talking. So when she first started having a conversation, I assumed she was just playing with her dolls or stuffed animals. Really, no big deal. But usually when kids play pretend like that, you hear both sides of the conversation. In this case, I was only hearing one side. I would hear her say things like, "Purple, what's yours?" "Oh, mine too." "Did you also like cats?" "I used to, but I can't anymore." It was like there was legitimately one side of a conversation missing. I knew that she didn't have a phone because they didn't have a landline, and she didn't have her own cell phone either. So the next guess was an imaginary friend. I had encountered quite a few kids like that too, so no big deal. Later that night, I was helping her get ready for bed and she mentioned how she had a nightlight because both she and her friend were afraid of the dark. I asked her what friend, just making conversation, and she said the one that stays the night with me. Okay, so she did have an imaginary friend. I got her into bed and the rest of the night went by with no incident. It was probably a week or two later when the freakiest part happened. Once again, I was getting her to bed, and when I turned around to pick up one of her toys on the floor, she started laughing. I put the toy away, and when I turned back to her, I asked her in a playful tone, "What's so funny, Cecily?" "My friend, she keeps making me laugh." I asked her what her friend was saying to make her laugh. "No, she's moving her neck and making funny faces," she said, giggling. "Her neck? What's funny about someone moving their neck? Or rather, how can someone move their neck in a funny manner?" So I asked her, "What do you mean her neck? How is she moving her neck?" Cecily giggled again. "She has a giraffe neck. It's all wiggly and her tongue is blue, and mine looks that after eating candy." A giraffe neck? What does that even mean? I just told her that that does sound funny and tucked her in. I shut the door, leaving it cracked open some, and went back to the living room. Usually the imaginary friends are described like the child themselves. I had never heard a child describe them like something as wild as that before. While I sat in the living room, the thought of the giraffe neck friend was circling my head. So I went to text my friend about it. She was actually one of my former teachers and was around 12 years older than me. She reminded me that some kids are more sensitive to things that we cannot see, and maybe this wasn't an imaginary friend. Maybe it was a ghost. I hadn't even thought of that at first because I was skeptical. I feel like ghosts or spirits probably exist. Something about energy not being destroyed, maybe. But I had never had any true experiences myself. Not to mention, I feel like all of those ghost hunter shows on TV are staged, and really ruin the true experiences, if they do exist. But Cecily's description of the friend just seemed too unique and specific. That same week, when I watched her, she gave me a picture that she drew. She told me it was a picture of the three of us, myself, Cecily, and her friend. She said that she wanted to show me just how silly she looked. But what I saw made me feel like I was in some kind of scary movie. There were two normal-looking people, one by a bed and one standing by the door. And then there was a third person standing to my right. But that person was terrifying. They had a long neck that was drooping over. Think like a droopy stem on a dying flower. Their eyes appeared closed, and their mouth was frowning with their tongue sticking out. The mouth and the tongue were blue. To be blunt, it looked like someone who was suffocating or dead. That's when the neck thing started to make sense to me. This person looked like they had been hung. I tried to ask Cecily more about them, if she knew their name, or if she knew anything else, but she didn't. She said that she called her Flower because her dress looked like a flower, but then everything else she told me was the normal things you'd hear a kid tell you about their friend. Her favorite color, favorite animal, what she liked to do, and so forth. Cecily was not afraid or concerned about Flower at all. She just said that she looked funny, but that she was a good friend. I didn't know what her parents believed, and I was not about to bring it up if they didn't, and make myself look crazy. As long as she wasn't having problems, I figured I should just let it go. And that's what I did. I continued to watch Cecily for months after this. She rarely brought up Flower unless I mentioned her, which was rare. But knowing that she potentially had a ghost friend was pretty freaky to me. Cecily's mom's shift changed, so I was no longer needed after some time, and we never had any troubles throughout my time with them. But now, all this time after, Cecily and her dead friend live rent-free in my head. Hopefully she was at least a good influence, and hopefully Cecily was able to bring her some peace. So that my beautiful friends was... What was that? Creepy kid stories. I had to think about that for a minute. Why'd I have to think about that? I just finished this video. I don't know. Anyways, that was some creepy kid stories. It is the 5th collection of these stories. I think the first 2 are from like my first 10 videos on the channel. Then there was a 3rd one somewhere, and then I did a 4th one, I think, at the end of last year. So, I got some stories that had kids in them that were creepy, so I figured, why not? Why not do a creepy kids collection, right? I have the stories, let's make the content, let's make this happen. You know how that goes, right? Probably not. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, I don't know. My point is, good creepy kid stories. They're always creepy, right? Whenever the kids start saying the creepy stuff, that's whenever things just, like, all sense of comfort and safety just goes right out the window. You got kids with their creepy friends, imaginary friends. You got kids sneaking around out in your yard being creepy. Just come on. It's creepy. But yeah. Yeah. Thankfully, I don't have any, like, creepy kid stories from either perspective that is dealing with kids that have said or done creepy things, nor being the creepy kid. I don't think I was a creepy kid. I don't believe I was. Well, I'm not going to go ask anybody, so you're just going to have to take my word for it at this point. Hopefully you all enjoyed these creepy kid stories. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button. That helps tremendously. If you're new to the channel and enjoyed what you heard and want more content like this, well, consider subscribing. I do videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday, and sometimes Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays, and Sundays. So, with me, you either get 3 videos a week or 7. It entirely depends on what I have to read to you. I don't know. My schedule's so weird now. But it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. A lot of scary stories for you. Just sub if you like those. How about that? Subscribe if you like those. You can also go down below the video and leave me a comment. Let me know your thoughts. Which story was your favorite? Which story was your least favorite? What are your thoughts on creepy kids? Have you ever had a creepy kid experience? Like an experience with a kid that was creepy? Or maybe you have a childhood core memory where you were just an absolute creep as a kid to somebody, and you want to share that story. If that's the case, subscribe. No, not subscribe. Submit the story. The other day I told you guys to submit to the channel, now I'm telling you guys to subscribe the stories. Oh my... Submit the stories, astheravendreams.com. There's a button to submit your story. It's a simple process. It gets to me directly. I add it to my list, and I use it eventually. Be it in a themed video like this, or some random subscribers submitted stories video that I sometimes do. I don't know. It is an interesting day today. I am home alone. Patience is at her sister's house, getting her hair done. Not really done. Dyed. She goes over there typically in April, sometimes September, every 6 months or so. I guess that's 5 months, but whatever. Anyways, I know it's typically during our birthday week, or I guess the week of my birthday, because her birthday is before mine. But anyways, she takes time off work. She goes over there the last day, or someday during, gets her hair bleached, dyed, all that fun stuff. And it looks pretty. And yeah, sometimes I go over with her, sometimes I don't. Today I didn't, because I had work I had to do, paid for work that I had to actually do. And now I'm home alone. So what did I do today? Made like 5 thumbnails, put together Sunday's compilation, recorded this video. A lot of stuff. I did work. A lot of work. That's all I'm doing. Because I don't know how to fill my time. I don't know how to be alone, guys. Anyways. Whatever. Hope you all having a beautiful day. Hope I do see you again here very soon. But until then, remember, you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you are the best you that you can be. Do not forget it. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And until I see you again, my friends, much love, and of course, sleep well.